Welcome to Leadership is Dead, the podcast that challenges traditional leadership thinking and explores what it really means to lead in a post-COVID world. Each week, we dive into fresh insights and strategies brought to you by leadership expert Dr. Neil McIntyre. Each week, our hosts Liam Williams and Ava Brown take you through thought-provoking discussions based on Dr. McIntyre's latest writings and ideas, which are designed to help you rethink what leadership can be. But before Liam and Ava dive in, let's hear directly from Dr. McIntyre himself as he shares a few words on today's topic. Get ready, because he's here to set the stage for what's coming up.
You know, if you would ever talk to a company executive about their teams, very rarely would that individual describe their team as being poor, underachieving, things in a negative context. In fact, most often that executive would describe their team as being pretty good or even great. But the thing that I have oftentimes found ironic in that is that a recent study came out that had surveyed company executives, and in that study, it found that 77% of company executives stated that their teams are ineffective. In other words, their teams are poor performing or maybe at best average. So what's causing that? Now, I'm not one to believe that they hired the wrong people and that they have just bad workers, because I believe that during the interview process that the people conducting the interview with the organization vetted the people in the context of determining that they were actually skilled and credentialed to do the job. And I don't believe that they hired somebody who they knew would be incapable of doing the job duties that they were being hired to perform. So I don't think in most cases that it's a situation of bad employees. I mean, that may be the case in a few very rare situations, but I think for the larger context, there's something else going on in the background that's causing that ineffectiveness, that's actually causing that mediocre work environment. In fact, in my working with organizations, I have seen time and again where oftentimes it is the internal systems with the company that basically encourages and leads to mediocre work on the part of the team members. And the reality of this is that in every single situation, the company executives did not recognize it. They don't see it. They just see, well, this is how we've always done it. This is the common, normal way of doing things, in which they're not incorrect in that. But just because we have done things in a certain way, in a certain manner for years and years, and even across the board in various industries and organizations, it doesn't mean that this process or the system is foolproof and that it is perfect. In this case, our internal systems oftentimes lead to a mediocre work environment. In fact, I would argue that our systems oftentimes encourage mediocre work. Now, how does that happen? I believe there's three common ways it happens. Now, there's more than just these three, but these are the three main common ways that our internal systems encourage mediocre work. First, as an organization, we reward effort instead of results. Now, this is going to our annual performance evaluation when the supervisors, sit down and they evaluate the work of the employees and try to determine what type of raise that employee deserves for their work over the given year. Now, there's a lot of issues with that whole process in and of itself that I'm not going into right now. But what I will go into is say this, that oftentimes our assessments of our team members isn't really focused as much on results of their work as it is on the efforts that they put in. Now, efforts are important. I'm not saying ignore effort. I believe that we need to praise effort. I believe we need to encourage people to make innovative and creative efforts to make work better. I firmly believe that. But when it comes time to sit down and say, I'm going to reward you for whatever it is that you did, our rewarding them should be based on the results they produced and not the efforts that they made. Think about it in this context. Let's hypothetically assume that you're the owner of a baseball team and you have gone out in the off season and you've brought in this big name, high profile free agent to come play for your team this year. And as the year progresses, this free agent, big name, high profile player has demonstrated a pattern that they've just been in a slump year, for example, that they have had problems getting on base. As a matter of fact, they have got on base very few times. As far as batting runs in and hitting home runs, they haven't produced that. But now when they go up to bat, they will swing at the pitch. Most times they will swing and they will miss and they will end up striking out. Now, at the end of the year, or even halfway through the year, when you're looking at how much money you're paying that player and you're looking at what they're actually producing on the field, are you going to be happy with their production? Let's look at this right quick. Let's look at the efforts that this individual's making. This player is going up to bat every single time. They're swinging the bat. They're making an effort. They may be swinging at a bad pitch, or they just may be swinging at a good pitch and they just miss. Either way, they're making the effort. But their efforts are falling short of producing consistent or really any results at all. So as the owner of that team, you're going to be highly dissatisfied with how much money you're paying this free agent to have come to your team to play for you. And not only that, but the fans would be all upset as well. The irony of that is that even though we can see that very clearly in the environment of, say, a professional sports team, in our normal everyday businesses, we don't see it though. And we do the same thing. We reward effort instead of results. You're rewarding somebody because they show up to work on time. They stay all day. They're constantly busy. They're constantly doing things. They're taking the initiative for certain projects, but yet at the end of the day, they're not achieving any real substantial results. And from a business standpoint, your business will only stay open and thriving if results are achieved. So, from that standpoint, if you're trying not to encourage mediocre work, start rewarding results. Praise efforts, but reward results. That will elevate your team to higher producing, better quality, more consistent work there. The second way that our systems oftentimes undermine what we're trying to do and encourage mediocre work is through this concept where we evaluate value as being equal to time. We determine the value of something based on the time that that individual works for the company or whatever. I mean, think about it this way. A full-time employee, we say that that individual works at least 40 hours a week for our company. That is what full-time employment is. Now, I've oftentimes questioned, why did we come up with the 40-hour work week? Who determined 40 hours as being the standard? And by what method did they determine that it needed to be 40 hours? I mean, why couldn't it be 30 hours a week? Or why couldn't it be 50 hours a week? What is significant about 40 hours? Either way, that's how we classify what a full-time job is. And when we talk about our expectations of an employee and how many hours they need to work, that's the metric in which we use. But the reality of it is, if you look at pretty much every single one of us as human beings, none of us can operate at 100% efficiency for 8 consecutive hours a day. I don't care about the breaks. I don't care about the lunch break. None of us can work at 100% efficiency for 8 hours a day. Can't do it. On top of that, none of us can perform at 100% efficiency for an entire 40-hour work week either. It's just impossible. Our bodies cannot hold up to that physically, emotionally, mentally. We just don't have that type of energy source to draw from. But yet, our workplaces operate underneath this notion that as employees, they've got to put in 8 hours a day, they've got to put in 40 hours a week, and we expect consistent work, quality work for that entire time. You're not going to get it, okay? That's the reality. We can deceive ourselves, we can be delusional all we want, but you're not going to get the same type of work at the end of the day that you got early in the morning time when somebody is fresh and energized. And also, you're not going to get the same quality work later in the week that you got at the beginning of the week. It's just not going to happen. So here again, instead of equating value to be that of time, here again, the value should depend on the results achieved. Now, let's be honest. If you have an employee that has certain job duties that he or she must do, and they do it, at a high quality, they do consistent, very good work. Do you really care if they can achieve that work in 30 hours this week, or do they have to achieve it in 40? Does it really matter? Because here's the reality of it. Most of us in our job duties can actually get our work done in less than 40 hours a week and still produce high quality production in doing that. But with knowing that either way, I've got to be here on the job for 40 hours because that's how I'm getting valued by, then it encourages us to procrastinate. It encourages us to drag our feet. It encourages us to be delayed in our work production, whereas we could truly be more efficient and more effective in a shorter time frame, but the system itself encourages mediocrity. Now, the third way that our systems encourages mediocre work is because of faulty evaluations. Here again, I'm going back to the annual performance evaluations of your team members. Now, if you're in a supervisory position, you will know probably better than I that when you evaluate your employees, it takes less work to simply say that they met expectations as opposed to saying that an employee either did not meet expectations or even exceeded expectations. Because when you give them a met expectation assessment, there's no extra work for you as a supervisor to do to justify how they met the expectations. But if you're going to give that employee a did not meet expectations or even an exceeds expectations assessment, then you've got to provide some type of written justification to form the basis of why that particular employee deserved that evaluation. Part of that is because of the legality of things and trying to avoid grievances and, accusations of discrimination and inequality and all of that kind of stuff. But the other thing is it sets the foundation that if they either underperformed or overperformed, then you're identifying the areas in which they either excelled in and were just really great. Oh, and also on the other side, you're identifying areas that they need more work in to improve, to get better, and hopefully next year they will get a better assessment. So that the written portion of it accomplishes several things. But here again, supervisors are like all of us. We all are basically creatures who will choose the path of least resistance. What I mean by that in a workforce environment is that we're going to do whatever it is that is going to require less work. For supervisors in the evaluation time period, it's easier to give all the employees a met expectation evaluation because there's less work associated with that. There's also less complaints, there's less grievances, and less time that the supervisor has to explain why they awarded that person a met expectation assessment. Those type of blanket evaluation approaches discourage productivity, it rewards people for poor performance, and it demotivates those high performing employees. Case in point, years ago, back when I was still working with probation, around about the time that we had our annual performance evaluation, there was one particular officer in our office who she bragged that she had read 2 really big Harry Potter books in the span of a week while they're in her office getting paid. She bragged about it. People in the office knew about it. The supervisors knew about it. But it wasn't just her behavior for that 1 week. I mean, her work ethic throughout the entire year was kind of sort of on that same pace. She was a poor performing employee, and the supervisors knew this. Everybody knew this. But when it came time for the evaluation, she got a met expectations assessment on her review, as did everybody else. So what happened was the supervisor encouraged poor performance over actual results. I know I had spoke to that supervisor and asked him, why did she get the same type raise and the same amount raise that I got and everybody else got? And the only explanation I got for that was that next year things would be different. Next year our raises and evaluation would be based off of true merit of our work, and that things were going to change. But that this year everybody received a met expectations because of the way the system was, okay? Little did the supervisor remember and realize is that he also gave that same speech the year prior. Nothing changed. So what ended up happening is that those of us who were higher performing employees either did one of two things. We either eventually left the organization because our work was being devalued, or we significantly reduced the quality and efforts of our work because there was no incentive for us to go above and beyond what was really expected of us. I mean, we were going to get the same evaluation, we were going to get the same assessment for doing minimal quality work as we would for high quality work. So why put the extra effort into that? So our evaluation system a lot of times is faulty, and it encourages mediocrity. So if you're a company executive, if you're a supervisor, be aware of your internal systems and how they could actually send the wrong message to your teams. Because sometimes instead of sending the message that you're really hoping it sends to them, you're sending the exact opposite, and you're encouraging people to go out and have a poor performance work ethic. And those 3 ways are the most common ways that we see it play out in job organizations time and time again.
Wow, Dr. McIntyre. That was something else, wasn't it? His talk on mediocrity in the workplace really got me thinking.
Yeah, super insightful.
So let's dive into some of his key points. And maybe you'll find some of this resonates with your own work experiences.
Okay, sounds good.
First off, Dr. McIntyre pointed out this weird paradox. You know how most executives say their teams are doing well, good, even great.
Right.
But then studies show most of those same execs actually think their teams are kind of ineffective.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? What's the disconnect?
It is interesting, isn't it? A full 77% believe their teams are underperforming. So I think it shows that there's this gap between how leaders see things and the actual reality of how things are going.
Is Dr. McIntyre saying we should stop blaming bad employees?
Right.
I mean, let's be real.
Yeah.
It's easy to just point the finger at individuals.
Right. Well, he's suggesting that maybe mediocre work isn't always about having bad employees.
Okay.
Instead, it's about the systems that companies create. Maybe they're accidentally incentivizing mediocrity.
Hold on. So companies are accidentally setting their teams up to fail. How does that even happen?
Well, he laid out 3 major ways this happens.
Yeah.
And it comes down to how companies structure work and how they reward behavior.
Okay, so let's hear it. What's the first culprit?
First is this focus on effort over results. A lot of companies, they prioritize, being busy and showing effort instead of looking at actual outcomes.
It's like that baseball analogy he used. A high-priced free agent swings at every single pitch,
Yeah.
but never gets on base. So much effort, but 0 results.
Exactly. And think about performance reviews. A lot of times showing up on time, looking busy, that's what matters more than what you actually achieve.
Oh, yeah. And remember that story about the probation officer reading Harry Potter at work all day?
Oh, yeah. That's a perfect example of
Wow.
rewarding effort instead of results.
Wow, okay, I'm ready for culprit number 2. What else are companies doing to accidentally sabotage themselves?
Second culprit is this idea that value equals time, the traditional 40-hour work week. That implies that the more time you spend at work, the more valuable you are. But that's just not always true.
Yeah, I mean, who decided that 40 hours was the magic number? And honestly, can anyone really be productive for that long every single day?
Right. It's totally arbitrary. And this system leads to problems like procrastination and inefficiency, people stretching out their work just to fill those hours.
Wait, so you're saying my habit of waiting till the last minute isn't entirely my fault?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but it's worth thinking about how our environment shapes how we work. Okay, ready for culprit number 3.
Hit me.
This one's about performance evaluations. Dr. McIntyre was really critical of how companies just give everyone meets expectations. He says it's just a way to avoid extra work and complaints.
Yeah, he talked about how that happened at his old job, and it created this culture where nobody really cared to excel. Why bother going above and beyond if everyone gets the same rating? Makes sense why that led to a decline in work ethic.
Yeah, and remember that story he told about how the meets expectations approach led to a decline in work ethic at his previous job? When there's no reward for excellence, it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's funny how those 3 things are all connected. When companies reward effort over results, it feeds into a faulty evaluation system. And the 40-hour work week just makes it even harder to focus on real outcomes.
So it's a vicious cycle of mediocrity? Are we doomed?
Not necessarily, but it is something we need to be aware of, both individually and as organizations.
So what can we do about it? What's the big takeaway for everyone listening?
Dr. McIntyre wants us to look closely at the systems in our own workplaces.
He's saying we should ask, is my company accidentally encouraging mediocrity?
Right. Once we can see the problems, then we can start finding solutions.
So how do we break free from the cycle? How do we create a culture that actually values results and excellence?
That's the interesting part. Dr. McIntyre does offer some solutions, but I think it's important to understand the root causes first.
Okay, so let's get into those solutions. What's the first step?
We need to shift our focus from effort to results. It's about recognizing and rewarding people based on what they contribute and the impact they have, not just how busy they look.
So instead of just clocking in and out, it's about actually making a difference.
Exactly. And that means we need to change how we measure and evaluate performance.
So what does that look like in practice?
Instead of evaluating people on tasks or activities, let's set clear goals and objectives that are tied to specific outcomes. And we should give regular feedback and recognition that focuses on the real impact of their work.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about this whole value equals time problem? How do we move away from that?
Dr. McIntyre suggests looking at alternative work arrangements, things like flexible schedules or results-only work environments. So instead of just putting in hours, employees can manage their own time and focus on delivering those results.
So it's about trusting people to get the work done, no matter when or where they do it.
Exactly. It's about shifting how we think about trust and accountability.
Okay. And what about those faulty evaluations? How do we fix that?
Dr. McIntyre thinks we need more nuanced performance evaluations, ones that give clear, specific feedback and actually differentiate between levels of performance. We need to move away from just saying meets expectations and have honest conversations about how people can improve and where they're excelling.
So we need to create a culture of honest and constructive feedback where people feel comfortable giving and receiving both praise and criticism.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that means leaders need to commit to training and supporting managers so they can do those evaluations effectively.
So it's not just about changing the evaluations, it's about changing the whole culture around them.
Absolutely. And it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process that needs constant attention.
This is a lot to process. But I think the big takeaway is we have to be intentional about the systems we create. We can't just assume things are working because that's how it's always been done.
I agree. And change takes time and effort. But if we pay attention to the messages our systems are sending, we can build workplaces that support excellence instead of mediocrity.
You know, we've all experienced those frustrating work environments where it feels like you're just spinning your wheels, putting in effort, but not seeing results. And I think Dr. McIntyre was spot on when he talked about how companies accidentally create these systems that reward the wrong things.
Right. It's not about blaming anyone. It's about understanding that we all play a part in building better systems, systems that help us grow as individuals and help organizations succeed.
Dr. McIntyre's talk has really made me think about my own work environment. I'm curious, did anything stand out to you as particularly relevant to your own experience?
I was struck by how much emphasis he put on feedback. Not just the generic good job kind, but really specific constructive feedback. That helps people see how their work contributes to the bigger picture. I think that's something we all need, whether we realize it or not.
It's easy to just go through the motions at work, you know? Yeah. But Dr. McIntyre said, we don't have to settle for mediocrity. We can create work environments that are actually energizing and inspiring, places where our work really matters.
Absolutely. And it all starts with awareness. Once we see how these systems work, we can start to identify the things we can change, both in our own work and how our companies operate.
So be proactive.
Yeah.
Challenge the status quo.
Right.
Have those tough conversations and push for change.
Yeah, and remember that building a better work environment, it's a journey. There's no quick fix or one-size-fits-all solution. It's about constantly reflecting, adapting, and trying new things.
This has been a real eye-opener for me, and I hope it has been for you too listening. Dr. McIntyre reminded us that we all have the power to change our work experience. We're not just cogs in a machine.
Right, we have a choice, we have a voice, and if we work together, we can build workplaces that support excellence and creativity. Places where we can find real fulfillment.
So as you go about your week, think about what we talked about today. What systems are at play in your own work? Is your company accidentally encouraging mediocrity? And what can you do to make things better?
Even small changes can make a big difference. Don't be afraid to speak up, ask questions, and challenge the way things are. You might be surprised by the impact you can have.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for excellence.
That's all for this week on Leadership is Dead. A big thank you to our hosts, Liam Williams and Ava Brown, for their insightful discussion and analysis. And of course, a special thanks to Dr. Neil McIntyre, whose writings and thought leadership have provided the foundation for this podcast. If you're looking for more information on leadership strategies for a post-COVID world, be sure to visit Dr. McIntyre's website at neilmcintyreconsulting.com. You can also connect with him on LinkedIn by searching for Dr. Neil McIntyre. Remember, leadership is evolving, and it's time to embrace new approaches. Subscribe to Leadership is Dead wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next week for another enlightening discussion. Until then, lead with purpose.